Again, everyone, and we are getting now ready for the last session. Remember, we're going to have also at 4 a round table where with Manuel we will try to summarize all the several interesting issues that came up so far during the day, and the more interesting issues that Jerry Pacheco and Guillermo Lopez will share with us. This last session is about international business. So what has happened, what are the challenges, and what are the development in this area. We're going to have a little different structure than the other sessions. Jerry will make a more extensive presentation with slide support, and Guillermo will then also intervene talking about his area of activity. And more specifically, Jerry Pacheco is the president of the Industrial Border Association, while Guillermo Lopez is the general manager for Monarch Litho. And if I mispronounce names or organizations, forgive me, please. It's, as I said early this morning, is my bad Italian accent. I just can't lose it. I moved too late in my life to this country to speak perfect English. All right, thanks, Guillermo. So, Jerry, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Can you see that? Excellent.
Yep.
Let me turn it on here, and we'll get going. So as Lucio mentioned, we play several roles out of our office here in Santa Teresa. We run what's called the International Business Accelerator, which is funded by the state legislature through the Small Business Development Centers Network. And we are the only statewide international trade counseling program in New Mexico. We help companies from all across the state export and import, do trade shows, we do trade missions, we do research, we make contacts, we travel with our clients, what have you. The Border Industrial Association is the association we formed about 13 years ago to represent the 4 Santa Teresa industrial parks down here. We've got about 125 members. We represent about $2 billion worth of investment and getting close to about 6,000 employees. We represent the biggest industrial base in the state of New Mexico. We'll talk about that. And then we're also contracted with the New Mexico Partnership, which was formed in 2003 to market New Mexico and to recruit industry to New Mexico. So we primarily recruit industry to New Mexico's border area. Now, I'm going to talk about what's going on during COVID, but I'm going to do it in kind of the light of how we're progressing our projects. One of the most exciting projects we have here on the border is we have Santa Teresa on the Santa Teresa side, and then on the Mexican side, immediately across the port of entry, we have San Jeronimo. So we've incorporated both sides of the border into a 501c3 we call Los Santos. And what we do is we have a board of directors of the landowners in Santa Teresa and the one landowner in San Jeronimo. So we have monthly board meetings, and I'm the secretary treasurer of that organization, and I also essentially run it because my staff is the de facto staff that runs this. So we meet on a monthly basis to plan infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure, improvements at the port of entry, marketing, politics, what have you. And let's talk about our position here. I always like to show people how equidistant we are between the continents. And we'll talk about our efforts in Asia, which I think are very, very important at this point. So New Mexico, Texas, Chihuahua, and we are right there for a little geographic lesson there. That's our Rio Grande. And now let's talk about our partners on the other side of the border. Let me tell you, we look at the other side of the border as an opportunity, as our partners, as our neighbors. We don't look to the other side of the border and say, oh my God, we have waves of immigrants and there's bad stuff and it's bad Mexico. That's not how we live down at the border. I'm going to be presenting to a Rotary Club in Southern Illinois, and they want me to tell them the truth. But with all the hype and the rumor and the, hyperbole, it's kind of hard to make people believe that we're not all carrying guns down here getting shot at. So this is San Jeronimo. So you got the Rio Grande, pretty much it's almost the border between New Mexico and Texas. There's the Texas-New Mexico border. You've got El Paso, Texas. You've got the Pan American Freeway going into Mexico. You've got El Paso, Juarez, and then you've got San Jeronimo right there. And we've even developed with our partners a cross-border campus. We're going to have our first tenant of that cross-border campus. And I'll talk about that tenant because this all happened during COVID. 47,000 acres in San Jeronimo controlled by one developer. This dotted line, that yellow dotted line, is the international border looking into the United States. So you see where it says the Santa Teresa Jetport and the Airport Industrial Park at the top of the screen. I'm sitting in the Airport Industrial Park, and Guillermo's in the park adjacent to me in the Santa Teresa Gateway Rail Park. Guillermo's production plant actually has rail-served spur that goes right to his back docks there. We have the Foxconn campus right here. These four buildings are Foxconn. You've got R.L. Donnelly. Foxconn, by the way, is making 70,000 Dell computers and HP tablets every day. We get about 200 to 250 trucks full of those electronics every day through our port of entry. And again, it's symbiotic. Even though Foxconn is located on the other side of the border with about 9,000 employees, we have about 280,000 square feet of space that Foxconn uses on our side of the border to supply that plant on the other side of the border. We always say that for every 3 jobs created in Mexico, we get at least 1 back here, and that's the case here. So R.L. Donnelly does circuit boards, and I have to update this aerial because we have a big production plant here that just opened during COVID, and I'll talk about that shortly. Now, our side of the border, the Santa Teresa Industrial Base, the Santa Teresa project. There is the Santa Teresa project. It looks kind of like a triangle with some weird stuff on the top. That's the Union Pacific project and the airport. Our Border Industrial Association focuses on making that turquoise area better. Guillermo, by the way, is the chairman of the Border Industrial Association, and I'm the president. So just to orient you, just to the west of El Paso, Texas, is our port of entry there. Excuse me. Oh, I'm going backwards. That's the port of entry. That's the Pete Domenici Highway that goes from the International Port of Entry into I-10 in West El Paso. That's our airport. That's the Union Pacific project. These areas here, that green area is the park that I'm in. Guillermo's in this blue area right across the railroad tracks. We have the Santa Teresa West Park, which is our newest park, and the border industrial parks at the border. We've got 65 companies, about 6 million square feet, and we're nearing, once the rest of the projects are, terminate that we have going, I'll talk about, we'll have about 6,000 employees. Future infrastructure in dotted lines. And that green dotted line, we already have a project plan to take rail from the Union Pacific project into San Jeronimo to connect both sides of the border by rail. And there's our binational campus. We tend to survive and do well over here because nowhere on the entire US-Mexico border is so much land, about 22,000 acres or so. Nowhere is so much land controlled by so few owners. So via the Border Industrial Association, when we make a decision to do something and develop a vision, it's very quick that we can carry it out. This is an interesting slide. I like this slide. If you look, this is currently the most populated states in the United States. But if we look here, where 43% of the total population growth is going to be in the next 20 years, New Mexico is sitting right in the middle of that. And then 95% of the population growth in the next 25 years had the Pacific Northwest, and we are in good shape. Now, during COVID, we saw something very interesting. We saw the way things operate from a supply chain standpoint tested. And this happens from time to time. If you remember in 2011, the big earthquake and tsunami hit Japan. And in the automotive industry, the supply chains were really affected. Well, when COVID happened last March, approximately when it really exploded, we saw supply chains being disrupted. And you saw our automotive companies. And by the way, we have a big automotive base. Most people in New Mexico wouldn't figure that, but we have a big manufacturing automotive base here in New Mexico in Santa Teresa. And I'll rattle those off when I show you some of the companies. But at the beginning of the pandemic, we did have 2 automotive related companies shut down for 60 days. Others laid off workers, but by summer, they were already back in business and trying to keep up with the demand. But the way cargo enters Asia by container, 30% of all inbound container traffic in North America comes through the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. And look how we're connected. That yellow spot is Santa Teresa. That line between Los Angeles and Santa Teresa is called the Sunset Route. From Santa Teresa, from our intermodal project here at in Union Pacific Intermodal Project in Santa Teresa, train flows all the way to the upper Midwest, to the south, and to the Gulf Coast. Then you've got BNSF, a little north of us, going through Valencia County. We have a big opportunity, and we did during COVID. Initially, you saw the railroads, like everybody else, kind of quiet down during the beginning of COVID, but now they're almost to the same levels that they were when they were going gangbusters before the pandemic. Union Pacific is one of our, we have a Union Pacific representative on our board of directors who feeds us a lot of real good insight on the rail industry. And that red line is Fedomex going into Mexico. Ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, all the major shipping lines. During COVID, before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, one of the things we're focusing on is that traffic coming in from Asia. 53% of what comes into the West Coast proceeds significantly to the east in the United States, and it has to go through us. And we believe that with the backlog of traffic, what's going on at the ports of entry, because ships are actually backed up at the ports of entry because of the COVID disease, we have an opportunity to convince a lot of West Coast companies, why are you in California, with your distribution centers? And why are you paying $15 an hour? You can come to Santa Teresa and you can pay $6 an hour, and without the headaches you have in California. And we've started seeing a lot of interest, and we've recruited a couple of companies from the West Coast already. Those are the train lines coming out of the ports of entry. And you've got BNSF up there. These container ships are just out of unimaginable, 20,000 plus containers on a ship. We saw what happened when one ship gets stuck in a little ditch in the Middle East, right? I mean, you've got billions of dollars on these carriers here. One thing that we're planning on happening in the next couple of years is, of the roughly 800 miles between Santa Teresa and the West Coast, only about 100 miles are not double tracked, meaning that a train has to pull over in Yuma to let another train go by. Once the 100 miles gets double tracked, we're essentially going to have a freeway for trains going back and forth. That's a picture of aerial of the Union Pacific project. It's about 11.5 miles long, and its widest point about a mile. It's a diesel refueling station, a crew changing station, most important for us, container yard, and also a block swap yard where they actually hook up the trains to go to different destinations. So they've got 2,200 acres. They do about 225,000 containers a year, which keeps rising every single year. They've got about 500 employees on there right now. So when this was being built, it was the biggest project that Union Pacific, or biggest project in New Mexico from an industrial standpoint. I tell people when I drive them out there, I'm going to show you miles of containers, and they think I'm just being metaphorical, and I'm not. There's miles of containers, miles. And you see them stretching into the distance. I had a guest here from Albuquerque last week who wanted to take a tour, and I showed him this, and the reaction's the same like most people have that don't know it's there. It's like unimaginable that there's that much commerce there. Now, of course, we are also on the southern arterial there in the highway system. Just some of our product. My office is actually in the top over here on, if you look at the left side of this screen, I'm literally sitting in there. In fact, I'm looking out and seeing this tree as we speak. So we've got the Doña Ana County Jetport. I'll talk about that. Union Pacific project I talked about. Pete Dominici Highway in the lower southeast corner here, and the port of entry. One of the things we did last year, let me state something that's a lot of people are going to find surprising, because I get called. I did an interview on Wednesday with Axios, you know, the online news thing, and the first question people usually ask me, and I guess it's out of habit, is, are you guys recovering from the crisis? I mean, are you back in business? We never shut down. We never shut down. Things like this, the Pete Dominici Highway was a $47 million project. We took about 7 miles and we took the asphalt off and we put concrete on, because we have an overweight zone that I'll talk about. But this project and other capital projects were finished during COVID. Just an aerial of the border. Now, these are some of the companies in our industrial base, and let's relate this back to COVID. When I tell people 2020 was the best year we've ever had in this industrial base, and that's probably contrary to some of your presenters. I mean, we had a boom year in 2020. Yeah, during the beginning of the COVID crisis, it was kind of a glitch, but people ask me, well, why are you guys doing so well? And I say, because we recruit companies here that I refer to as meat and potatoes. I always love to talk to my friends up in Albuquerque, and they're saying, we need biopharmaceuticals. We need nanotechnology. We need satellites. Yeah, we need all of that. But don't forget that what feeds you are meat and potatoes. Now, look at this. We've got metal fabrication, steel suppliers, copper wire manufacturers. You've got lithography company like Guillermo. We've got 2 corrugators that make cardboard for boxes here. We've got plastic injection. We've got components for the automotive industry. So the automotive industry, when GM shut down its plants temporarily during COVID, it did affect our automotive companies, but only 2 shut down. They're now scrambling to keep up with the demand. But look at the meat and potatoes here. In addition to that, you've got Sterigenics up here. Sterigenics sterilizes food products and medical products. How do you think their business was during the COVID crisis? And see, when you and I are sitting at home and we're ordering junk off of Amazon, consumer products, those consumer products probably have plastic, they probably have metal, they probably have copper wire, and it comes in an Amazon box. All of that stuff comes out of our industrial base. So our industries aren't the sexiest ones or the most cutting edge that people would say, oh, that's high tech. But it's industry that comes, they build a building, they spend a lot of money, they hire a lot of employees, and they're here for a long time. And I tell everybody, and especially during the COVID crisis, I made the case to legislators. I had a meeting yesterday with Senator Ben Ray Lujan via Zoom, and making the case to him, and Senator Udall was here the day before, making the case to both of them that this is the best way to diversify New Mexico's economy. I mean, we know what happens to petroleum. Tourism's bread and butter, but what happened to tourism during COVID, you know? And then we have government spending. Government spending's on a downturn the last few years. This is the way we diversify New Mexico's economy. And then look at this, just to give you a sense of our automotive base. My neighbor to the right of me is Southwest Steel Coil. They sell the huge rolls of coil that get slit and eventually get put into components in everything, including automotive. On the other side of my building is FXI. If you touch your headliner or any of the soft stuff in your car, that's what they make. Kitty corner to Southwest Steel Coil is C&Wire, a company from Turkey. 260,000 square feet of production space. They make 7 million pounds of copper wire a month. Across from them is Northwire. They take the copper wire and they make cable. Across from them is Acme Mills. Acme Mills makes textiles for your seats. Behind Acme Mills is Continental. Continental makes automotive sensors. Behind Continental is DA Inc. Continental, by the way, is German. Behind them is DA Inc. DA Inc. is a Japanese company making plastic injection products for the automotive industry. And down at the border, we have Sunrise Manufacturing. They do components for the airbags in automotive. So we've got a big automotive component, and we've got a big electronics component here because of Foxconn, because of CommScope. CommScope makes like the telecommunications equipment for satellites, and from satellites to everything you plug in your wall. Their business was gangbusters during COVID, gangbusters. And I'll discuss the overall effect here shortly. In the 2019-2020 period here, the public sector, mostly via the Pete Domenici Highway reconstruction, invested $66 million. The private sector brought $188 million to create about 1,032 new jobs and 1.4 million new square feet of industrial space. We even expanded Guillermo's Park by another 100 acres, and that was all during COVID. I told my staff in my office, if our exports, particularly our exports to Mexico, declined in the single digits, we would declare that a success. And let me give you some food for thought. Our little community of Santa Teresa, which is not even a city, we're part of the greater county, is about 0.001% of New Mexico's total population. If you add the nearest city, it's about 0.009% of the total population. This area here, what I always tell people, this area here has so many advantages, and we saw that during the COVID crisis. Our biggest advantage is our geographic proximity to Mexico. We're so proud because New Mexico is reaching about $4 billion worth of exports. If you multiply that times 11, our sister state of Chihuahua does 11 times that, more than New Mexico at this point. One of the largest manufacturing sectors in North America, and it's Mexico's largest exporting state. Now, this is what we do, and this is how we're interconnected, and it really was evidenced during the COVID. You have a lot of binational operations. You know, you'll have Ford with an operation on our side of the border and a production plant on that side, or what have you. And I don't want to have anybody get the idea that we're nothing but a distribution center. But 75% of our industrial base is some type of value-added production. The other is distribution centers. But companies that are in that shaded area tend to move their suppliers closer to where they're operating in Mexico. And in the old days, you could take 5 days from Chicago to get your component into your buyer's factory in Mexico. Those 5 days went to 3 days to 2 days. Foxconn, right across the border, on most of its requirements, has a 3-hour turnaround. That means that its suppliers have to be right across the border. One of the things that came to be very important during the COVID crisis, and in fact, that's resulted us in the last 30 days, we have just signed 2 new produce importation companies. They fresh produce from Mexico. In Mexico, trucks can be loaded to 96,000 pounds. If they're divisible load, they have to offload to 80,000 in the United States. So we're the easternmost land port of entry. Everything to the east of us crosses the Rio Grande. So I started asking the NMDOT and the state police, why can't we let the Mexican trucks in at 96,000 pounds? Well, it's a law we have. And I asked state police, and they say it's a law we have. And you know what we did? We changed the law. We got a sponsor in the House, a sponsor in the Senate, and we created initially a 6-mile overweight zone, which we expanded to a 12-mile overweight zone. So Mexican trucks at 96,000 pounds can come into that zone, offload their product. And you may wonder, why would you want that? Well, because we get their warehouses. The day that this came into being, Interceramic, which is a Mexican company, signed its lease and came into Santa Teresa. You can also load at 96,000 pounds in Santa Teresa and ship to Mexico. It's the only tool of its type on the entire US-Mexico border. And both of the produce companies that we signed said that that was the major factor for them coming into Santa Teresa. And especially because personnel, we're having severe personnel shortages. So many companies are hiring, but they can't find the workers. A lot of them are still at home on subsistence from the government or a stimulus check. And so you've got to maximize the way your logistics operate. So the overweight zone during our COVID era was a key factor in keeping us in the game to recruit new companies. Now, unfortunately, you see the drop in New Mexico's overall exports during COVID right there. And it's sad because you could see in 2019, we hit a record. We hit a record for exports to the world. But, pandemic. And a lot of this, let me kind of clarify this. A lot of this is China, because a lot of companies, even before COVID, were caught in the US-China trade war. And we're seeing those in the numbers. Look at our exports to Mexico. They barely went down by 8%. And again, I said, if we stayed in single digits, that was a success. And 2020 was still the second highest exports to Mexico and to the world that we've ever had. So even during the pandemic, we didn't go back 5 years. We didn't regress 5 years. We went back to 2018 levels, which is really good. This is an interesting chart that we put together. The red line is New Mexico's exports to the world. The gray line is New Mexico's exports to Mexico. And let me clean this up. You see Albuquerque there with the yellow line? Did you know that Doña Ana County does more exports to the world than all of Bernalillo County and anywhere else? Red line's exports to the world. Gray line is New Mexico's exports to Mexico. That blue line is Doña Ana County. Guess what? We're in Doña Ana County, and the Santa Teresa Industrial Base is part of the Las Cruces Metropolitan Statistic Area. So we are the gray line down here. And we are now accounting for almost 60% of New Mexico's total exports to the world, which is incredible. I mean, I never thought when I started my career years ago that would happen. When I started down, obviously, but the Santa Teresa Industrial Base is about 60% of the state's total exports. Here's what we export: a lot of computer parts, processors, a lot of medical, surgical, dental appliances. We do a lot of fabricated metal out of here. I love this slide. We plotted all 50 states exports to the world on the left, all 50 states exports to the world on the right. Guess what that thick red line is over the last 10 years? That's New Mexico. We lead the nation in export growth because of what's happening at the border. Kind of another way of looking at it. And to Mexico. Our little port of Santa Teresa, which you would look at it and say, that's a port of entry, is the 7th most important port of entry on the entire US-Mexico border. We would be higher on that list, but Customs and Border Protection separated the 2 commercial El Paso ports of entry instead of reporting them as one. Now, that people say, well, what's going on with that 21% reduction? That's during COVID. Let me tell you a story here. You're going to love this story. Well, I already told you about the supply chains getting disrupted, right? So for about 60 days, people were scrambling, trying to get everything set. And that affected production, that affected exports. Well, one big warehouse for Foxconn was shut down by the Doña Ana County Fire Marshal, who got into kind of a spat with the general management about doing things to make things safer for the employees, like putting more emergency signs on, stuff like that. And the company was slow in doing that. The county shut them down, and that supplier to Foxconn, which makes those 70,000 Dell computers a day, was shut down for 10 days. And electronics have a high value, but they're small. You can put a lot of computers in a truck. But now if you're talking car components, are a lot bigger than a computer. Our truck traffic, ironically, hit a record during the pandemic. We've never made so many commercial crossings at the Port of Santa Teresa as we did last year. but we still experienced a negative total value because of what happened to Foxconn. The head of Dell Global Logistics called me up irate on the phone and said, "You tell me the story, what's going on here?" And I told him, and he says, "I'm spending $9 million on 10 cargo jets to fly in supply from Asia so we can bring the people back to work at the Foxconn plant." That's the negative 21%. It's an aberration, and that'll quickly pick up this year. Kind of winding it down, these are some of the things we did during COVID. When you take into account during 2020 and 2021, we're going to have completed, or we're going to have started construction on 1.3 million square feet of brand new industrial space. And these are some of the projects that we did during COVID. We recruited a Dallas-based development firm, investment firm. They built what's called a speculative building. A spec building is when you build a space and then you go find the tenant. It's not built specifically for a tenant. This is a 315,000 square foot building that I just showed a prospect on Tuesday. It's just enormous. Imagine a building that's about twice the size of a regular sized Walmart. We got another investor, also built spec space that finished during the COVID, another 183,000. So we have 500,000 square feet of spec space. We've recruited Admiral Cable. They kept their construction going. We've recruited 3 Taiwanese companies in the last 2 years. 2 of them were recruited during COVID. Admiral Cable, we announced in 2019. Zentria is our second Taiwanese company. They're going to build a 150,000 square feet facility. They make semi-truck trailer walls. And then over here is where that big spec building you saw. And by the way, in this park, we have a cold storage warehouse. That's the largest cold storage facility in all of New Mexico. Zentria, that second Taiwanese company, is coming in here. And then Symmetrec is a company that's going into an existing building. In fact, I can see the building right across the street from my office here. So we've got 3 Taiwanese companies. That resulted during COVID of us going to the state and saying, we've got a trend going on here. I always said the first was the anchor, the second is the movement, and the third is the story. And then we got the third. So we teamed up last year with the state of New Mexico to sponsor a New Mexico trade office in Taiwan. So we have boots on the ground, and Ethan Chen, who is our buddy from the industrial base over here, is he repatriated back to Taiwan, and he's our New Mexico trade representative there. He's already generated leads for us, by the way. So here's Admiral Cable. I need to update this because they're building another 12,000 square feet here for their office space. And then this area here, this is part of Guillermo's rail park over here. We have our own privately owned rail park. It has its own locomotives. It's called the Short Line Railroad. Iron Horse owns the track, and Iron Horse owns the locomotives. And they can bring in, for example, like to Guillermo. If Guillermo orders paper and it comes in from California, it comes in by rail, they can deliver it right to his back docks because his spur runs behind his facility. But we expanded this last year. We expanded this industrial park by another 100 acres, and we put in about 2 miles worth of new track. We now have about 10 miles of privately owned track in that Santa Teresa Gateway Rail Park. Oh, there's the photo. I forgot I had that. That's their headquarters. They're building right there by their main production plant. During COVID, and this was appropriate, and I really wanted this to happen, and it happened. We were engaged with a PPE packaging company out of Wisconsin, and they need to expand their operations, and they have customers throughout Mexico. And so they were scouring the border. We did our pitch. The state came in with some incentives. We made them feel loved, and they're going to erect a 120,000 square foot building. So this is another one we got during COVID. That is the official groundbreaking of W Silver Recycling. They're building a 120,000 square foot building to put recycled materials and separate things in there. And our 2 produce companies, been engaged with them since last year. They were committed verbally coming last year, and both of them have signed their leases. In fact, I spent much of the morning working with one of them, getting them set up legally with the state of New Mexico and Doña Ana County. So we had our best year ever in the industrial base, which is ironic during such a pandemic. And sometimes I actually feel guilty saying that. But we're probably the only sector in New Mexico's economy that actually grew during the pandemic. And again, think of it as I say, it's meat and potatoes. That stuff keeps occurring even during a pandemic. Oh, and immediately on the other side of the border, I mean, most people think this building's in the United States because it's right up against the border wall, is a 200,000 square foot factory with 500 employees that just opened last year in our partner's space over there in San Jeronimo. That's a candy operation. Guess what they make? Nothing but gummy bears, billions of gummy bears. So if you're a gummy bear fan, I bet you your gummy bears are coming right out of there. Union Pacific invested another $20 million last year to expand its facility, which is great. See all the containers there? Because of the gummy bear factory, we had to convince New Mexico Gas Company to put a second natural gas line. We already have one going to the other side in San Jeronimo, but last year we put another one, about a 5-mile line. And then we had been lobbying the legislature alongside Doña Ana County to get upgrades for our Santa Teresa airport. Last year, all the upgrades were installed. New taxiways, lighting system. They tore up the landing strips. And now we can land 737-300 cargo jets here. Now, the only mode of transportation we don't have is water. So this is exciting. I knew it would come, but I thought it was 10 or 15 years in the future. But we're able to use the money efficiently. And during the COVID, we've really been marketing this particularly to Asia, to companies that could fly their product in to the distribution center here and land it directly in Santa Teresa. We saw that during the pandemic, there's a lot of interest for companies looking to reshore or nearshore. So we created a pretty good website. It's called reshore-na.com, reshore-na.com. That lists all the advantages we have here at the border, what's going on, and other Asian companies that are in our industrial base. And we have 4 now, 3 Taiwanese and 1 Japanese. USMCA was signed during the middle of COVID. And people asked me, how did that affect us? It was just like, oh, we're glad it's done. Because the biggest thing about the USMCA was the uncertainty of what would happen. I lost 3 deals. One that was about to sign on the dotted line to put a metal parts production plant here, that all got scared and never came because of the uncertainty and the agitation we had in the negotiations. During COVID, thank God that got done. Now, this is the other thing during COVID, which is a real sad thing down here at the border. People ask how immigration affects us down here. It does, but not in the sense that you think it does, where we're seeing a lot of people climb over the wall and invade the United States. Most people that are apprehended coming to the United States seeking asylum, a lot of them from Cuba and Central America, are coming to the actual ports of entry, and they're seeking asylum there and giving themselves up. By law, if they come to a port of entry, we have to interview them, process them, take them to a medical facility, and house them until we figure out what to do. Every time we get a wave of immigrants coming to a port of entry, that takes customs officers off of the commercial lanes, and they have to process them. That means our truck traffic gets slowed. We start developing lines, and we have the fastest port of entry on the entire US-Mexico border. That still occurred during the pandemic because a lot of people that were being made to stay in Mexico got tired and they ran to the ports of entry. And even though we're removed from the population base in El Paso, if they've got any money, they pay for a taxi to come out here and they come and seek asylum. That was an issue for us during COVID. AMLO is an enigma. And during the COVID crisis, a lot of my friends in Juarez, for example, were very frustrated with the way the Mexican government handled the pandemic, how to protect yourself and especially now the distribution of vaccines. It's become very difficult in Mexico. And that is it. Can I turn that over to Guillermo? Because he's got a personal experience there at Monarch Litho.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you so much, Jerry, for the presentation. I'm very proud to be the chairman of the BIA, which is basically all the industrial area here in Santa Teresa, southern portion of New Mexico. After this presentation, I just find out that we are the least sexy company here in the area because all of them are very sophisticated. We are kind of a simple and humble company. We are a printing company. We have our headquarters in Montebello, California, with 250 employees. We have after that we decided to open up a new operation. We did in Juarez, Mexico, where we have 180 employees. And this operation that we start around 20 years ago. In Santa Teresa, we have 30 employees, and on each company we have invested, several millions of dollars for different needs. As Jerry mentioned, we are the biggest minority in the United States printing for the United States government printing office, but also we have a huge clientele on the commercial side. As Jerry mentioned, we have been very busy during the COVID-19, but it haven't been easy. I mean, it requires no more discipline, and it requires to wake up earlier, should I say. Here in our plan, we have to implement new policies of checking temperature to all the employees in the morning, checking the oxygen levels, and disinfect the floor every morning. And we still do that, even though that we are in a better path against the COVID. But that's part of the discipline that's still in place. And we are doing exactly the same policy in our Juarez plant and also in Montebello. And I say it hasn't been easy because sometimes you have employees that get sick, and of course you get very frustrated on the personal side because you don't want your people to get sick because they are human beings. And secondly, because of course affect your production, you have to be more creative about how to make things happen because customers didn't stop. We have a huge clientele on the medical field, and they were so busy, and also on the food industry. So basically, we were an essential company that we never stopped, even though sometimes we were short-handed, but we never stopped because customers couldn't stop either. I mean, that was part of the service that we were providing to our society, and at the same time, part of the economy. But that's one of the reasons that we have been successful is because of the discipline and also trying to be responsible with our employees and at the same time with our customers. In our Santa Teresa plant, we produce a lot of commercial work, government work for the federal government, of course. And Montebello plant is more into commercial things. They print more for the big studios, the Sony studios, the Disneyland studios, Universal. They print big jobs for them. And Juarez plant is more into packaging. It's a combination basically of what we have in between the three plants. So we are a private company, and we just share projects sometimes between one another. Of course, as long as commercial, we cannot do that on government work, but on commercial work sometimes we do. So we have to get across a lot of our products from here to Juarez and vice versa. Basically, Jerry mentioned we receive paper rolls here by train to make it cheaper. And once they are here, we send it to our Juarez plant. They process over there, they bring it back. And from here, from Santa Teresa, we do the distribution to the rest of the nation. So here we are kind of the distribution center on both ways, on the raw materials and also on the finishing material. And it has worked very well. Believe it or not, here we are kind of on the middle between the two plants. And because from the Montebello plant to here is a day away, and from here to the Juarez plant is also a day away because of long lines in customs, especially now on COVID-19. And but we have reinvented ourselves and trying to make things happen. And very, very happy to be part of this community. Very, very happy to be BIA chairman and trying to get the best of all of us. I mean, here on the industrial base, every day we try to do our best. And I think that's the only way that we are going to get over this COVID thing is if we continue whatever we're doing and we do it with more emphasis, with more passion, and we do it, try to do it right. But at the same time, trying to keep an eye on all the safety or cleanliness of the place, and also to our employees, because even though a lot of our employees, they have been already vaccinated, that doesn't mean the problem is over. I mean, we have still to be careful, and we go one day at a time, should I say. So I don't know if, do you have any specific question or?
Yeah, I would like, first of all, I would like to thank both of you for explaining so well what a success the operations at Santa Teresa are being for you, but I would say for the state in general. And I had two questions, so you can figure out who wants to answer. The first one, how can the state continue in this success? Do you need more investment, legislative support? So it's because it's clear that in the mix of the New Mexico economy toward more resilience, your activities at the border are fundamental, and they seem to not be too much affected even by crises like COVID-19. The second, what I gathered from Jerry's presentation is that probably the main threat or the main problem can be linked to a turbulent relationship with China, which of course we don't know yet. President Biden also seems to be, maybe in a less bombastic way, but relatively aggressive toward the global adversaries of the US like China and Russia. So do you see that as a risk? And if so, what could be done to minimize the damage to the Santa Teresa operations and therefore to New Mexico if the tension, the commercial tension with China increases?
Well, I'll take a stab, Guillermo, if you want to kind of come in. You asked about the state. Let me tell you a story about the state. When the COVID outbreak happened, the nature of our border industrial association changed completely. Instead of just advocating for the industrial base, trying to get funds for the industrial base, supporting them, we went all PPE. We literally bought tens of thousands of dollars, and it was, let me tell you, it was difficult because you had to know where to look. I got PPE for the industrial base anywhere from Argentina, Mexico. I got some from China, and one of my best sources of PPE in terms of gloves and hand sanitizer was this tiny little beauty supply store in Las Cruces, New Mexico, that my friend turned me on to. And the lady worked with me to save. When she'd get a shipment in, we'd buy it by the caseload, and then we distribute it at the same cost we bought it to our industrial members. What happened after we got over that first kind of hump was really interesting. If you recall, the state has a rapid response system. If you're a business and you get more than 4 COVID cases within a 14-day period, you're shut down for 14 days. Well, that works for a Denny's restaurant. It does not work for CommScope, which has 250 employees, because the percentage of 4 to 250 employees is ridiculous. Plus, they're in the global supply chain. If you shut down a Guillermo and he's working for a big food company, then all of a sudden you shut down that food line. So we had to go to the governor's office and make the case that does not work for us. You can't do that. You're going to shut down our global supply chain in many areas. Plus, how does that look for us to be recruiting businesses in the future? Nobody's going to want to come to a state that does that. But we worked through things logically with the governor's office, and they changed the language to exclude essential manufacturing employees, which is our industrial base. So we had to do that. Now, the China factor is interesting. We have several members of our industrial base that export to China, and the main complaint is that 35% tariff. And our exports to China in the COVID period were down, I think, 34%, more than a third. And that's going to continue to be an issue. And it's very disappointing, because our Chinese exports, until we got into this war, were going up and up and up. It's our second largest export base. China and Mexico account for roughly 3/4 of New Mexico's exports. I don't know how to even explain how to solve that. That's really at the federal government's level. And we're one of the states that's smaller. If you can imagine what the farmers are feeling like in the Midwest with their billions of dollars to China. So that's going to continue to be a problem. It's going to continue to be reflected in our industrial base and in our exports.
Right. On the comment that Jerry did about how we reinvent ourselves as a group and try to get the PPE. Also, some of our members help us a lot because they have the leads of bringing masks or sanitizing things. So we, as a group, we reinvent and we make things happen. But of course, on the government and should I say on the personal side, for me, the best government is the best one that is invisible, meaning that makes things happen using common sense and making things happen as soon as possible. And during pandemic, we were working very close to the government, to the local government here, with OSHA and health department, and they were very helpful, and they were going straight to the meat and potatoes. So we were so pleased with all the help that we got. And in order to expand this area, in my opinion, is to get the attention from up north toward the south, and so they can see where the money is being generated. And if they make money here, in my opinion, you should invest here so you can grow this area or you can grow this business. In other words, it's just common sense that if you are not producing money on something and you're trying to invest more money, well, maybe you're putting that good money into bad money. But here in New Mexico, in Santa Teresa specifically, if you are getting results as a state level, on the federal government level, why not bring more attention from up north? And we need to let everyone knows about what's going on, about what Jerry explained. Okay, what's the success of this place? So that's my opinion on that.
And it was interesting during the COVID crisis. was so frustrating. All the state's first priority, and I don't blame the governor at all, is to save lives and not over tax the hospitals with sick people. But there were certain kind of orders that made no sense for our industrial base. And I got the image of somebody, in an office at the Department of Health, kind of saying, this is what we got to do, without understanding that New Mexico has a pretty big industrial base here on the border that you need to treat differently. But we worked all through that, and the state's been good, but we've been very successful because we're not part of a municipal government. We don't have a city in Santa Teresa. We're part of the greater county. Our local government is the Doña Ana County Commission, which is 50 miles north. But we're pretty creative. Right now, we've launched with one of our members. One of our members is the hospitals at Providence. We've launched a company by company vaccination effort that is going to start next week. We already have the first few companies registered for their employees. And that's the way we get rid of the problem, because right now we're short of employees. I mean, there's hiring signs up and down the street. And I talk to our members and they say, well, number one, people are kind of afraid of being in an enclosed space, in a manufacturing environment. And they're making too much money sitting at home watching TV because they've got unemployment. But we got to get people back to work. And by getting that vaccine and vaccinating whole companies like that, whole employees, it makes it safer for everybody. As Guillermo said, that doesn't mean that you won't have a case or two, but you're not going to have 20 anymore.
Correct.
So if I understand correctly, COVID for you is being a problem, let's say in the opposite. Right?
Yes.
That is ironic in a way. Right? But I have to say that something also that both Jerry and Guillermo said connects to an issue that I've seen for a long time in the state. You're saying they need, in the northern part of the state, they need to understand what our industrial success in the south and our international trade in the south. And something that emerged, for instance, today on the state panel, state level panel, was a discussion, and also the city, was a discussion of whether do we consider ourselves a border state, whether Albuquerque, for instance, is a border state. So an idea that it seems like in the north of the state, the border seems very far. While, of course, it's the bread and butter of what you do.
I always say that, I've always said that we have a tortilla curtain that runs at Socorro, New Mexico. Everything north of that tortilla curtain is the north, everything below that is the south. And I can say that there has historically been this mindset. And I can say this because I'm from northern New Mexico. My family's from the Mora Valley and I grew up in Espanola. People up there, the Santa Fe Albuquerque corridor, believe that that's what is New Mexico. Okay, they think it's a political base, and they're right. It's traditionally been the political, population, and industrial base of New Mexico, and everything south of Socorro is just, we over here completely consider ourselves part of the border. I mean, we wouldn't be down here and we wouldn't have operations. We wouldn't have this industrial base if it wasn't for what's going on in Mexico. And you down over here, you don't know when you're in El Paso or New Mexico. I mean, there's not a line that says you're in one or the other. My house is about 3/4 of a mile from the Texas border and you wouldn't even know it. So part of the problem that I've always seen is everybody here on the border in El Paso, Juarez, along the border know what's going on in our industrial base because we're making announcements all the time. In fact, I just approved a press release on the 2 produce companies that's going to go out. The problem is this. A lot of people don't read print. The Albuquerque Journal is good about putting our successes in there. So is Albuquerque Business First. The problem is most people get their news online or they get it off the TV. We're in a different media market than Albuquerque. The El Paso stations cover us. Up to, I think, Truth or Consequences. From there, the Albuquerque stations cover the northern part of the state. So a lot of people are not seeing what's going on down here.
I see the point. But this leads me also to connect to another thing that was said earlier. In the afternoon session on the national level, John Garcia from the SBA, he was highlighting the importance of actually having more communication and having a global plan for New Mexico, a plan of development that gets everyone together and really consider all needs and reality. Because something that was highlighted a lot in the session was exactly what you're saying. They don't know up there what we're doing here, and vice versa, right? New Mexico is, after all, a small state as far as population, but I see more variety than in my native Italy, as far as every part being almost on its own. You know, so that probably I would assume that you probably agree with this need of having a comprehensive view of all the different economic realities and needs of New Mexico.
John is an old friend of mine. When I started my career for Governor Bruce King in 1991, John was his deputy chief of staff. So he, myself, Bill Garcia, no relation to him, Roberto Castillo, were the team that opened up the Santa Teresa port of entry way back when. So when John says that, I 110% agree with him. There is no global plan. I mean, there is, I guess, if you consider what we do down here. But what we've done is try to incorporate, we established what's called a supply the suppliers program. One day I got this kind of idea, my God, we're like a little country unto ourselves down here. It occurred to me through the International Business Accelerator, I try to get New Mexican businesses to export. But it occurred to me that our industrial base is its own country. And what I mean by that is this. I survey on an annual basis all of our members, generally to ask them, are you going to hire people this year? You can fire people this year. What are your skills that you need? What are your issues? Now we also say every day that you open your doors, what are you consuming? Okay, I consume pallets. I consume bubble wrap, whatever, inert gases, lubricants. We created a database, and then I'm not saying I sent it by email, I physically drove around the state handing that database off to all the local economic development organizations. The whole point is this. We want to tie the rest of the state into this industrial base. By doing that, we connect ourselves, and we're not on an island to ourselves. And in the 4 years we've had that program, it's resulted in $26 million worth of contracts to New Mexican companies. And now legislators love us because we're working with their constituents to get them sales. And they're not doing an export per se out of the state. They're kind of doing an indirect export by helping an exporter that does big volume. So it's all these programs that we have to do to connect. But John Garcia, my old buddy, is absolutely right. We have to have some semblance of a plan. We do down here. We know what we're going to do. But I don't know if the rest of the state does. And that's an awful thing to say because I'm probably the oldest guy involved in this industry in the state. And I don't know.
Well,
go on, Guillermo, sorry.
As Jerry mentioned, I mean, here we're kind of a different people or different culture, should I say, where we are right in between 3 states and 2 countries. And if we get some benefits from El Paso or Juarez here in Santa Teresa, yes. But in the other side, they also get benefits from us. So it's part of that community. So basically here, we define here ourselves as step citizens, meaning Santa Teresa, El Paso, ELP, step. So we are part of a big community, basically. But that's the way that is here in this area. I mean, that's the way the economy moves, and New Mexico get a lot of benefits with employment, with the workers, help us here in this area, and making a bigger and safer and closer community. That's what it is.
And we have to promote that there's a great big world out there, okay? And we only have what, 5-7% of the world's population in this country. And it frustrates me that we have the biggest city in the state, which is Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, probably 800,000 people. I was talking to the Department of Commerce representative that represents West Texas and New Mexico, Bob Queen. He used to be part of our team during the Bruce King era, by the way. He was in the Economic Development Department in the same trade division that I was in. So we've continued to be friends for 30 years. And we were talking and analyzing the exports, New Mexico's exports. And in October, they revealed the exports, they published them by MSA. And when you look at MSAs, and that's how we found out that the Santa Teresa industrial base is accounting for 60% of the state's exports. Albuquerque, which should be an export powerhouse, if you took the Intel plant out of there, Bob was telling me that Albuquerque would fall to something like 160 or 170 of all US cities in terms of being an export base in a border state that shares a border with one of our biggest trading partners. There's something wrong with that picture.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I'm very glad that we've been able to add this international dimension, a border dimension to what we're doing, because it's true, we are definitely a border state, and one way or another, we need to get the best benefit possible from that. It's great, all the work that you're doing down in Santa Teresa to develop this dimension of the state. I think we need to be really grateful to what you do. And I think, Felicia, do we have a poll also for this session? We probably do, right? Because we normally finish all sessions with the polling. Aha, there.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
Just, it appeared. So resilience and international. How strongly do you feel that the international support system is building resilience for the New Mexico economy post-COVID? And so this for the attendees or participants to vote, and we'll probably have a couple of minutes to comment on that. Let's see, let's give a little time to people to think about it. As we have done this also for the other sessions, we always ended up for a poll to see what is the general feeling about it. Let's see what the results are there. So how strongly you feel that there is resilience, this is building resilience for the New Mexico economy, and we have almost everyone is between strongly agree or agree, 88% if you sum them up, disagree 22%, and no one strongly disagrees. So it seems to me that this is probably, Jerry, Guillermo, probably people know more than what you think about how good things are being developed at the southern border, right?
Well, we have to be optimistic.
Right. Either you got a lot of friends in the audience, or they're noticing these activities.
No, it's not me, it's Jerry.
No. I mean, the global economy is our best opportunity to diversify New Mexico's economy. And we've got a little bit of it here at the border. We just need to kind of spread that kind of sentiment throughout the rest of the state.
Wonderful. And from the point of view of an academic instructor, CNM can be helpful and supportive. So on this note, I thank you. It's been really very important, your participation. I think you really helped the awareness and the dialogue they were trying to develop with this initiative.